We are very happy to have with us three very talented presenters. Andrea Joe, she works with the Into program at St. Louis University. Before that, she worked at the Beijing Center for Chinese Studies in Beijing, in China. Nicholas Sun. Nicholas was a Bruce City missionary. He worked on college campuses to reach out to students on Catholic University campuses in the Milwaukee area. Is well versed and well trained the way that you engage American young people in contemporary society. I feel very privileged to appear with these two colleagues.
Thank you, everyone, to allow me to present again. Here, as Father Michael introduced, I worked in two different positions, served different students for many years, actually. When I was in Beijing, I served American students who study abroad in Beijing. When at St. Louis University, I serve international students who come into United States for their international studies. So those two perspectives are very different, but also in many ways are similar. In the morning sessions, I talk about recruitment. I didn't talk about my work experience too much, but I want to let you know I love St. Louis University very much, but one thing I think I like SLU most is how they locate the campus ministry. Because in SLU, the campus ministry is actually in the same building with the Student Code of Conduct Office and the Counseling Center. Campus ministry is in the first floor. And if you want to go to Code of Conduct Office, you have to go through campus ministry first, then go to a Code of Conduct Office. Similar as a counseling center, you go through campus ministry office, then go to the second floor, you go to the counseling service. How genius is it? Yeah. Because I brought my student to different offices for services always. And when I have to bring my student who is encounter challenges, no matter if it's a code of conduct issue or if it's a mental health issue, I brought them to those offices. And when we pass by the campus ministry, I always say, see here, there's another resources for you. If you finish your counseling or you finish your talk with the school, if you need more help, here they are to help you. I think that's one perspective that I like SLU very much, is that because I know they think through those details and trying to group them together in a way serve students best. So today I'm going to talk about student services. This is actually my professional. Actually, I'm a student affairs professional. I specifically work in student affairs, supporting international students. When I'm talking about recruitment in the morning, everyone is interested in like bringing students to your school. But what's next? When you have so many international students, especially Chinese students in your school, how can you support them? What do you know about them? How much do you know about them? And how do you want to support them? I see many reports, news saying like international students, they consider them as a cash cow. As I explained in this morning, I said 5% international students covered 30% of the overall tuition. As well, every 7 international students created 3 jobs in United States. Those numbers are actually very shocking numbers. Actually, show the one value of international students. But is this all of their values? Of course not. I worked for Jesuit education for many years. From my experience, at least, I think Catholic schools value international students not just for money and jobs, not at all. We value them because those diversity they brought to our campus, because all the different spirituality, different backgrounds, different work experience or study experience they brought to this campus. it's a whole more just a job and the money. So that's one thing I want to emphasize at the very beginning, because I know everyone is sitting there and care about Chinese students as much as their parents do, probably. And a lot of this generation, like in my age or this younger than me, those kids, they're from one child family. They're on the one child policy. They're one child from that family. Their parents actually expect you to care about their kids as much as they do. So that's why there is another way I see like how Catholic university fits to Chinese students, other than those two keys I talked about this morning. Many of the teachers and school administrators are talking about how international students, especially Chinese students, change the classroom dynamics, made the staff or faculty encounter so many different challenges when they're dealing with international students. Then how we can support them to be successful? So this is a question I'm trying to answer today. In higher education, we're always talking about the first generation. I don't know how much you are familiar with this term, first generation. Typically, when you're talking about first generation in university, you're thinking about minority students who are from lower income family because their parents didn't have enough resources to go to higher education. They know very little about American higher education. They need some more support, but they're afraid of getting supports, or they couldn't get support. So that's a typical first generation we're thinking about. I think international students they are definitely a hidden first generation. They are not typical first generation. They are not from that type of family. Probably their parents are also received higher education from their home country. But regarding to the American higher education, their parents know as little as a first generation student's parents. But we never actually count international students as a first generation in any type of school practice. That's why I feel like there is a gap for international students to be successful or to be as successful as other domestic students. So that's why I want to introduce my best practice when I work with my students at St. Louis University. I use this type of high contact student services. What is high contact student services? So go back to a high contact service. I don't know how much you know about this term. It's a business term. High contact service means you're hand holding your customers. And low contact means you give them tools and they figure out by themselves. So in the business field, both services are acceptable depending on what customer you're facing. Some customer probably need more support, but some of them don't really need much. For example, if you're walking into a store, do you want the assistants to kind of always follow you, ask you, what do you want, how are you doing? Or do you feel like just leave me alone, I'll just explore by myself, right? That's two different types of services, and both of them are accepted. But when we're serving Chinese international students, then we're thinking about all the processes that they are going through, for example, from pre-arrival to ongoing services. How much do you hand-holding your students? This is a question I'm asking many educators, many of my co-workers. And if you say, I don't want to hand-holding students, actually this is an answer I hear multiple times from staff or teachers. They said, no, I don't want hand-holding adult students. They're not kids. They're not in kindergarten or fifth grade. They're in university. All of them are over 18 years old. They can make their own decisions. Why should I still hand holding them? If I'm hand holding them, they will learn anything. They wouldn't learn anything. So a lot of them actually don't really want to hand holding students at a university environment. So this is actually the truth. Including a lot of my coworkers that I'm talking with. One example I can give to you is I'm talking about hand holding. I do hand holding my students. So one example I have is I have students' social media. Every single student in our program, I have their social media. I talk with them on social media. Either it's WeChat or Line for Taiwanese students, or WhatsApp for students from Hong Kong. I have their social media. I talk with them always. After COVID, when many students left the United States, went back to their country, trying to engage in online studies, the many school administrators are having difficulties contacting students because they feel like, oh, I email students, no one's responding, we don't know how to contact with students. That wasn't my issue at all. So I don't have any students couldn't connect with us at all. And I explained my strategies to many of my coworkers in last probably March, April, kind of talking to them, oh, this is how I was working with my students. A lot of my coworkers, oh, that's surprising. I mean, some of them said, oh, that's surprising. That's great. I wish I can do that, but I couldn't. That's their reactions, and after years, they're still not doing that. I understand many in this culture, it's definitely some of them feel like it's not necessary or it's not even preferred to contact students on social media. For example, like Facebook, you need to contact us. It's kind of not that appropriate. But if this is the only way, what are you thinking about this, right? So why I want to use hand holding as a way to hand hold my students, even if they're adult students, I kind of listed 3 reasons why I'm doing so. The first is kind of thinking about my work experience when I'm working into different positions. I noticed that both sides, like in both positions, my students are asking silly questions. So I had American students emailed me many years ago, was asking, so when I'm in China, how can I wash my clothes? Is there a what should I do? Is there a washing machine? Like how can I wash my clothes? What should I bring with me? That's a real question. And I have to answer these questions to them and explain what that look like. Even take a picture of the washing machine to say, hey, this is what that look like, right? And similar way, there are lots of questions. Sound silly, but they are so important to students. What's that mean? Why they're asking those silly questions when you're thinking through that? Because students are not ready for study abroad. They're never ready. But I mean, that's so normal. Like when you're thinking about yourself, are you ready? Are you ready to be to be on this position? Are you ready for this conference? Are you never ready? No. Right?
Good point. Yeah. Give me another month. We'll get it right.
And like my son's almost 7 years old. Some people keep on asking me, "Are you like how ready are you to be a parent, to be a good parent?" No, I'm never ready. Like these international students, are they ready for study abroad? Like 3 months in advance to their semester? No, they're not ready. They're still asking very basic questions. I'll list some questions they asked and talk through those. That's one reason. The second reason is actually coming from a student development theory, which was developed by Kagan Cliff. He is one of my favorite student development theory author. I say favorite because his book is so hard to understand. However, this theory he mentioned about bridge is actually exactly what I'm talking about. We're building a bridge for university students and expect them to cross this bridge, reach to the other end where we're waiting for them. We're just waiting at the end and see, oh, why my students are not here? Where's my students? Like, why this student arrived but not that student? We're wondering why, but we never examine our bridge, like where it starts. Like for international students, there's a huge gap there. They could even be on the bridge. So that's an issue for international student services. So they definitely need extra supports. They need to be hand holding. The third one I want to mention is in 2015 when I still working for the Beijing Center. At that time, I started to kind of interested in how Chinese students chose schools, like how they make their decisions when they study abroad. I conducted a survey with about like 100 Chinese students who are about to study abroad and asking them, so list which one is most important for you when you decide which school to go. Those are top three. Of course, first is the ranking. You know, Chinese students are always talking about ranking, ranking, ranking. It's always about ranking. That's not surprising. And the location is not surprising to me. No, I think a student coming from Shanghai, they will have more culture shock when they go to South Bend, right? It's totally different environment. So location is important, I understand. But the second one they actually put is connections. So I follow up this question and asking, what connections do you mean? They were like, okay, we want to we want to go to a school that have connections with us. That's kind of self-explained, but when I'm thinking about these connections, also try to apply this to my daily work, I started to learn a little bit more. When you're looking at the top 10 American universities that accept Chinese students, one of the school is kind of maybe surprising for you is University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. U of I accepted a lot of Chinese students, even though their ranking is not that high. Their ranking is pretty high, but in that similar ranking, there are lots, so many schools. Why Chinese students are going to U of I? So I actually did research on this. I found out that one of the reasons are probably in back in 1970s, 80s. There are a lot of Chinese professors actually went to U of I to study abroad. So when they are coming back, when they're coming back to China and started to teach their students, they would say, oh, I'm from U of I. If you want to study abroad, go to U of I. This is the type of connection, right? So that's something they're looking for. So that's the connections they're looking for. So when you're thinking about connections, thinking about the professors, the alumni, thinking about everything around them, even like schools administrators like me, when my students confirm at the point of the confirmation, they receive offer. They also receive my WeChat message say, "Hey, my name's Andrew. I'm from St. Louis University. I will advise you in the next several years. Do you have any questions?" That's a connection, right? So if you don't have those type of strong connections, then build one. That's something you really need. Now, I think how to kind of practice this type of high contact student services, I put this think out of the box. Yeah, so examine what you're doing now and think out of the box and thinking about can you do this in a different way? So I'm thinking about this in one time, like why, like when introducing those social media to connect with students, why there are so many co-workers or Americans refuse to use social media, because that's students' comfort zone, not staff's. So students feel comfortable to connect with you on social media. It's you are not feeling comfortable connect with students on social media. So think about this. So think out of the box. Are you using email? Are you using social media? Are you meeting students through webinars, or are you going to China to meet students in person? St. Louis University sent me to China at least twice to meet students in person prior to orientation. That's one of the best practices, I think, to connect Chinese students. How often do you follow up with students? When students feel like they are having questions, they're hesitating to come to United States. How often do you follow up with them? Or are you going through some ongoing supports? So you're thinking about like all of the actions, right? Are you just giving student tools, or are you hand holding them? I witnessed student receive email like this long email talking about the career supports, right? Students coming to me printed that email like for like 7 pages email and asking me, what should I do? Like I have all of the tools, what should I do? I took action. Bring them to the career center office in person. All done, right? Take an action instead of sending out those long emails. Similar as counseling services, I always take my students to counseling service through the campus ministry, so they got the support they want, right? I just want to say, yeah, don't be afraid of hand holding your international students. Because that's really what they need. And you don't expect to hand holding them always, but at least the first several semesters, help them as much as you can is actually very good practice. And last, I mentioned about like parent support, how much we can support parents as well. Those are some of the silly questions I encountered before. I list them here, just kind of for you to laugh. I don't know why. It's probably not that funny when you're looking at this again. Like students are always asking, "Do you have a Chinese food on campus?" They're also always asking, "Can I bring my refrigerator with me when I go into St. Louis?" Sounds silly, but that's a real concerns they have. Recently, I think a lot of Chinese students and parents are so concerned about Delta, and they ask a lot of questions about COVID. Are you ready to answer these questions, and how do you want to answer these questions to them? Do you just tell them, "Oh, don't worry, come, we're fine, we're all getting together without masks, it's okay"? Are you going to think this way? Or are you going to give them more details and say, yes, it's concerning, but 1, 2, 3. Like, what's your approach? It's just very, very important how you approaching those questions. Those sound silly questions. To end, I just want to read through my favorite author, Kagan. He said, a bridge must be well anchored on both sides, with as much respect for where it begins as for where it ends, instead of waiting in our favor side and worried why students have not passed over. That's all my presentation. Thank you.
I am Nicholas' son. I worked in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. They formed their own missionary program and hired me and several other people my age to just go on their campuses and preach the gospel, meet students, and to just bring them to realize the love of God. And like you said, like I didn't interact with any Chinese students, but I really do think like the experiences that I've had can be applied to just everyone, every person, and this is kind of like relating to I think the one of the keynote speakers this morning. He was showing like a statistic about like what people are struggling with, like loneliness and isolation, purpose. And I think this is what American students struggle with too, as well, and I think just everyone in general. So I so with just like with that in mind and knowing like what people are longing for, which is Jesus Christ, like we are there to encounter them. And so yeah, so my talk is called Mission Practicals: Living in the Present Moment. And why I say that is just because throughout my 3 years as a missionary, like the importance of being in the present moment, it's just it's so crucial because we're here, we're not in the future, you know. And but the Lord, He's everywhere, and He's here right now, and so it's just realizing how can we hear the Lord speak to us and invite us into encountering this person or yeah, just being with this person in front of us right now. And so yeah, just thinking about this talk, there's 3 points I think that came up in like throughout just in preparation of this, just even like these 3 points that have been like emphasized during my 3 years as a missionary, which is like prayer and community and this quote, being all of the human person, and they all relate to one another, but I think these 3 points is just so crucial and so practical for mission work. And so prayer, I remember being formed when about prayer. We read this one of the Vatican II documents, Agentis, which is one of the quotes: imbued with a living faith and a hope that never fails, the missionary should be a man of prayer. You know, and so it's like we all know that, like, yes, like prayer, we need to pray, but like I think just to continuously emphasize that without prayer, um, like how can we do mission? You know, someone said to us missionaries, prayer fuels mission, and and in this life of prayer, we are formed by our Lord. You know, and as we are formed, then we are able to go out into college campuses, go out and reach to the students and meet them where they're at. And so, like throughout these 3 years, like what we did as missionaries is like we were asked and encouraged to pray holy hours every day. We would pray before we go out on campuses. We would pray, you know, before we meet up with students or pray with our students. And that, again, it's just to continuously live a life of prayer, and live this intentional life of relationship with God. Because to have this relationship with students first, we must have a relationship with our Lord. And so emphasizing that. But then the second point, the second thing I want to emphasize is community. And so I think this is like the more practical things that that are part of this, you know. So everyone is like wants community. Everyone wants like to be seen, to be known, to be loved, you know. And and community is a great way to you know, have those desires fulfilled. And so like the goal then is to foster community in several different ways, like in going out on campuses, having these large group events at my campus, or then Bible studies, and then like one-on-one discipleship. And so, like in the greater community, in the greater community of UWM, University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, we did several things to like reach out to some of these students. And again, like it really depends on what y'all's campuses need. But in our campus, like what we've been doing is like every Tuesday, every week, we would go on campus with a huge tank of like coffee, and go out there in the mornings, sometimes in the blistering hot late summers, or in the not polar vortex winter, but yeah, sometimes in the cold. But we're there to just engage and just reach out and just to have that face that like, hey, we are the coffee people. We are here to just give you coffee and yeah, to invite you all into a free dinner that we would have. And we've seen so much success from that, just to, yeah, like engage together. Hey, you want a cup of coffee before you go to before you go to class, and they're like, yeah, and then we'll just have a conversation, just talk about what their major was and what they're studying, and then after that, yeah, we just invite them and give them an invitation, and then we'll see where it goes, and so sometimes when we give those invitations, and they some of them do come to the dinner, some of them don't, and that's all right. We were just there to just extend that invitation. It's just open, and they're more than welcome to come through or not. um, so then like what we invite them to is our Tuesday night dinner. So we would have mass, and then after that we would have dinner that me and the missionaries prepare. Basically, we would like homemade all this. Like we would go out to Walmart, buy all the ingredients, and just make a ton of food. And we realized what draws people in is free food, because college students on a college budget cannot really afford buying food all the time. So free food is always a good, motivator. Be like, oh, let me go to this thing because they're serving free food, and that what we found too was like the most successful way to just like bring the students into, again, a place of community, a place to just feel at home and feel welcome, and yeah, I think that's like another point to emphasize. It's that like people want us to feel at home, and welcomed. And yeah, hopefully that what the missionaries did was just to provide that for them. And so yeah, they will come to the dinner. We'll have these tables set up, and we have mass, and then we'll have dinner. We're all just eating together and conversating together. And then me and the missionaries, yeah, of course, would like sit with students. And like some students would like be alone, and we'd go sit with them, and or there's just a group of students that are just talking, and then just going in there and having good conversation. I just remember even how that even during those moments, yeah, like I remember there's a student that came to our dinner, and he was just hanging out, just like he was just standing there. And I was like, okay, I think I should just go and talk to this guy. And I introduced myself and asked him what he did, what was his major. Yeah, and then we were just having those like that casual conversation, but it became a lot more deeper when he was like, yeah, I've been thinking about converting to the faith, but I have these questions like this and this and this. And I'm just there. I'm like, okay, I'll just answer the best as I can. And just after that conversation, he came through a few more times, just like even asking more deeply about the faith. And for me, I wasn't really there to just be like, okay, like this is my time to convert him, because it's not me that's converting, but it's our Lord working through me. But all I wanted to do is just be present and just listen to him, like answer his questions and to the best I can, and to just love him as he is, right? And I think this goes back to the whole point about being in the present moment, because we can have like these, like when we're interacting with students, we can have this like idea of like, okay, like this agenda, like I'm gonna do this with this student and talk about this with this student, and bam, like they're gonna be so Catholic, But at the same time, it's like no, because people are not projects. People are people, and people want to be loved, and people have emotions and feelings and thoughts, and we're just called to just be there, be present in that moment, and whatever it is. And so, okay, I kind of went off track, but okay. So that was like one example, like that large group, why that dinner, like that was like super helpful for just encounter with these students. But then we also had like retreats, and that was always, that's always usually good to facilitate like just talks and small group in that retreat. And then we had small groups as well. So we had like Bible studies on like things on the what is it, like salvation history or like Lectio Divina. And usually, those are always like the best, like good things. And and I'm trying to think. So like we had that and the community. Um, so yeah, that's like facilitating like these um, communal aspects of like the mission, and I think one of the main things too that we did was one-on-one discipleship. So like we would go out, meet with students one-on-one to like grab coffee, or and like at a coffee shop or at the Newman Center, or even on the main common hall area, just to just talk about their life and talk about their faith, or whatever it is that is going on in their life. And I think this is like the important thing too that I emphasize, that it's just like being in awe of the human person, because everyone is so different and everyone is so made like uniquely. No one's the same, and to just meet them there and to just be is just so important, to and like in this ministry, because again, like people are not projects. So if one has this idea of like, oh, I'm going to say this or do this, and they're going to be like converted, they're going to be so deep in the faith, like that's not the way one should approach it, but just to approach them as who they are, because like I remember there'd be some students I would meet with for like we would go deeper into the Bible. We would like talk more about prayer, so we would read different books on prayer, like Time for God, Power of Silence, and they were like really are changed in the way, like we're just reading it, we're talking about it, and then their prayer life would change, or something like that. But I remember I met with a student who, just generally a quiet guy. I remember meeting him, like super quiet, but in prayer I felt like the Lord wanted me to, just like meet with him, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna meet this guy, and after like a conversation or two, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna like we're gonna like read the Bible and just like go deeper. But then like when I brought that to him, he didn't seem like really comfortable with that, and I'm like, okay, maybe we shouldn't do that. But still, we kept meeting, and it wasn't me like talking about or like discussing about the faith, but just about just his life, like what's going on with his family, just hearing him out, and I just realized that's just like maybe like I just needed to be a person for him to listen, just a person for him, just be there, just be that presence, of just presence of being like an ear for him to listen. And I mean throughout those years too, like I've just seen the change in him, and the change that like he has, like even in that, like the deepening of his own faith, just because of my presence in that way. And I'm not just saying, and I think all these things too, I'm not saying like this is all me. It was like, no, this is all our Lord, and I was just only a vessel, basically, of encounter, and that's why like I emphasize these things, like of prayer, of community, of being all of the human person, and how that is, just so important, for the ministry of just encountering people, of meeting them where they're at, and I think, I know like this is all like very general in a way, but I really hope like the things I've said like really uh, hopefully stick with you in a way that it's just like that we need to live a life of prayer. We need to have uh, this desire for souls, and to foster community with them, and to just at the end of the day love them as they are, and see them as who they are, as a beloved son or daughter of the Father. So thank you.
When the Chinese looked at what happened during the Opium Wars, they realized that, well, maybe Westerners are barbarians, but they certainly have good technology. And they began to argue about, well, how can we resist the Western incursion? Some theorists argued that, well, maybe we could adopt some things from the West. But there was a concern, what would that do to our culture? So they made a distinction between what they call ban and shi. The roots or the foundation, we keep that. That's our traditional culture. But we can adopt, the Western techniques and technology, which is kind of superficial. In the end, it turns out that as you begin to adopt technology, or any quote-unquote superficial things, as they become part of the practice of life, they end up infiltrating everything, right? Mm-hmm. You classic example I tell my students, when they invented the automobile, they didn't realize that it would lead to the invention of the suburb. Mm-hmm. People used to live in cities because you relied on transportation in the city. And cars made suburbs possible. That's a whole transformation of life. The ethnic ghettos broke down in the cities and suburban life sprang up. So again, that distinction seems to be an artificial one or a slippery one. And the reason I mention this is because we have a world that is running after technology without thinking about the implications for human life. And in fact, there's a kind of almost a sociological drive because we're in a globalized world where everybody's competing with everybody else. That we're competing on the arena of the level of money and professionalism and everything else. And other things are being left out of the equation, not being taken into account, and being transformed unwittingly by this dynamic. So China has done miracles in developing its economy. But did they think through the implications for family life? Did they think through the implications for community? Did they think through the implications for forming people in the traditions of their ancestors? It's great to study engineering, but is there any time left over to study Confucius? And I mention this because the title of my talk is Catholic Universities Sharing a Human Vision with Chinese International Students. I guess one of the things that I love about Chinese culture, and especially the Confucian tradition, is the deep humanism there. Confucius lived in a time of social breakdown, and his concern was not how to build better weapons, but how to call us back to being human. So there's this, he thought it's important to study ethics and morality, but you need to study music and poetry too. And all throughout Chinese history, the scholars also had to be painters or poets or something else. And so I think this is one of the great meeting places for Catholics, this humanism, because we too have a Catholic humanism, a deep commitment to being authentically human. So I was thinking about this and what we have to offer Chinese students who come to the United States. But let me back up a little bit. I now serve as director of the China Association, but back in 1982, I was a young Jesuit seminarian. And at that time, the director was a woman that some people in this room may know, Sister Janet Carroll. Sister Janet Carroll was a force to contend with. But she didn't know everybody, and she was very much a people person. At this conference in 1982, one of the things she mentioned was, she said, it seems like there are more and more Chinese students coming to the United States. So she noticed this back in 1982. She wasn't the first person to notice it. But she said, this is really an opportunity for us. We have been traveling across the Pacific all this time, but Chinese students are coming here to our shores. We need to welcome them. We need to reach out to them. And so At that time, I was a graduate student, a student of theology, and I got together with some students in the Harvard Square area, some graduate students, and we befriended. We just reached out and befriended Chinese students who were studying at Harvard and in the Harvard Square area. And we'd get together, just to share, to have coffee or Chinese food, to exchange ideas and experiences with one another. And in fact, one of the students who was doing that, one of the theology students, was a lay student from China who had been recruited by the famous father, Ed Malatesta, if anybody has heard of him. So I just remember the wonderful conversations. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to share who we were and what we were about. Little did we know how many Chinese students really would be coming to our shores. Then, fast forward, in 2010, I started up my tenure as a sociology professor at Loyola University Chicago. And I had a number of students from China in my classes. And they were always very curious about American society. Why do you people do this? Why do you think this is the best way to do things? Why do you think everybody should follow the American system? What about this? And since I did know a little bit about China and I had been there, I said, well, actually there are strengths to this way of doing things and strengths to that way. Let's think about it. Let's talk about it. Let's explore. And again, I am a sociologist, but I take a humanist approach to sociology, which means I look at values in society, how they play a role in shaping our culture, and sometimes not. I look at meaning, how people put together their world, how they understand things, and what difference that makes. And I focus on people, not systems or outcomes and that sort of. And I look at human beings as the subject, not just as the object to analyze. So that's what I would say is a humanist approach in sociology. And I had one student who, I've had just different reactions from students when they experience sociology or reflecting on society this way. I've had maybe two different sets of reactions. Some students say, wow, thank you. You've taught us how to think about society and what's at stake and the choices that we make. You've taught us to think about that in new ways. And others have said, wow, I didn't know that Catholicism gave us the resources to think about things this way. And I never really explicitly mentioned Catholicism, but they knew I was a priest, and they could see that where these values are coming from. So I even had one young man who WhatsApped me from Hebei province and told me, Father, as you know, I live in Xingtai. I didn't even know there was a Catholic community here. But after your class, I went back here, I got to know them, and I just got baptized.
Hey.
So I was not teaching a class in theology. All right. But, ultimately, who is Jesus Christ? He's the model, our model, for what it means to be a human being. That's who Jesus Christ is. That's what we look to understand what does it mean to be human. There are many ways to answer that question. Jesus Christ is our answer. So, again, I wasn't explicitly trying to do evangelization, but in teaching sociology, I can't help but bring who I am into that. And so my reflections on justice, the dignity of the individual, meaning, compassion, this humanism, these all are reflected in what I do. And I think we should think about that, because I know that people have told me, yeah, I'm an accountant, but the way I do accounting is impacted by my Catholic faith. Or I'm a police officer, but the way I serve the community is impacted by my Catholic faith. And I think that should be heartening to all of us, that whatever we do, we should do it as Christians. And that is distinctive, and that is important. And when it comes to encountering students from China, young people from China, our friends and colleagues from China, we speak to them just by the way that we do things. So I think that's a really important, that was an important lesson for me. And I think probably that's where I would begin when we think about reaching out to Chinese international students on our shores. Now, as I said, when I was at Loyola Chicago, I wasn't doing campus ministry per se. And when I did go to the chapel on campus, there weren't very many Chinese international students there when I was doing my priesty thing. There was a Bible study specifically for Chinese international students. And there was a very dedicated layman, Paul Wong, who started this up and built on foundations that he had laid over 20, 25 years. And I remember him talking about how he could see the changing of the times in the different students who came to Chicago from China. You know, the first ones who came, well, everything was so new. It was an adventure. It was an opportunity to explore together. You know, just to go out for a pizza with them was a kind of a learning experience, a new thing, novel, weird. And he said, you know, they were curious about the West. They weren't jaded yet. So he had, in addition to he had opened a Bible study for people who were ready for that. But then he even in those early years just started a basics of Christianity. It's kind of a seminar. You know, come with your questions. What is this nutty thing called faith? And people came. They were interested. They were curious. They wanted to talk about it. They wanted to explore it. Things have changed a little bit now. A lot of students from China have been exposed, and sometimes we think they know more than they do. But there are all kinds of opportunities that they have to at least have some of those basic questions answered. Maybe another couple of things that are different are, first of all, the Chinese students who come now are much better off than they were in the past. And they're also much more career focused. They have very specific objectives in coming to the United States. In a very competitive world, and their parents invested a huge amount of money in getting them here, and they want to get through this experience and go back to China and hop onto the next rung of the career ladder. So they're very focused, and they don't always have the attitude of wanting to explore quite as much. So things have changed, and that the opportunity to talk about those humanistic questions, maybe that space is a little bit smaller. Who knows? Maybe you have to create that space. So the way that we might reach out to Chinese international students, it changes with the times. But again, I don't think about missionary strategy. I think mission at its best is sharing what you have, but meeting people where they are. That's why missionaries go somewhere. And it is true that some of the early waves of missionaries did count their success in the number of baptisms. But in the modern age, I think we're more appreciative that there has to be a real dialogue. And when it comes to the China Association, we've actually been thinking about how to do this outreach to students. And there are different approaches to doing this. You know, depending on who you ask, there are different approaches. But what we want to institute as we move forward is creating the opportunity for great conversations. So what I wanted to do here was to talk about a little bit about how we should build on the foundations of our Catholic institutions, and also find where we can meet Chinese international students given their own background and concerns. So the China Association is actually actively looking at bringing on some staff to promote this kind of dialogue on Catholic and other campuses throughout the country. So right now we have been exploring how to do that. And we've begun to try to recruit staff to go to the different campuses, for example, starting in the Bay Area. Talk to the campus ministers there, talk to the theology professors, ask them, what has your success been like in reaching out to Chinese international students? Do you need a backgrounder? You know, you could have come to this conference here at Santa Clara University, but you didn't. But we can bring the conference to you. We can bring our resources to you. So we've been talking with people. In fact, over the course of this past year, we were delayed by the pandemic. We didn't even know if there would be Chinese international students, how to reach them if they do come to our shores. It's been a kind of a year in waiting. But we have had these online workshops, and we slowly began to build up our network. And we have begun doing some recruiting. And as I said, we're looking forward to rolling out over the next year or two a program for supporting the work that high schools and Catholic universities do in reaching out to their Chinese students. So actually at this juncture, what I'd like to do is even invite Kathleen O'Brien to come up here. So we Kathleen, maybe you could just tell them a little bit about yourself and your own background and work, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about where we might go from here.
Okay, well, thank you for the panelists. This was wonderful, and it's good to be with you all today. My name is Kathleen O'Brien, and my love for China really began in my own studies, and I was a philosophy major, and my professor, he taught Chinese philosophy and religious studies, so I really found a love for China and Chinese culture through that way, and then I ended up serving in China for 3 years with Mary Knoll as a lay missioner in Jilin, China, and then and now I'm currently studying systematics theology, and I'm in my last year working on my comprehensive exams and thesis, and so I was really excited when Father Michael approached me and asked if this would be an initiative that I would be interested in, and I was like, this couldn't be any more perfect, and it's something that I definitely want to help further in any way that I can, given my background, but also to try to get people like you involved in any way possible to really bring about the mission that we're all here for. So thank you.
So I think in our next session, in our plenary, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the concrete plans and ideas that we have for moving forward with this, from providing seminars for theology professors to working with campus ministers and helping them to connect with local Chinese Catholic communities who are anxious actually to do Bible study and to do activities with the Chinese international students who come here.
My name is Paul Lee. I have a question for Nicholas. Okay, I remember the good old-fashioned campus ministry, like Newman Center, Paulist, Order in the South, and so on. And in my days, I thought they are quite lame. They are waiting for the young college-bound Catholics to come to them. And I would bet we probably lost most of them and become the next generation of returning Catholics years later. So I'm so impressed on you guys' work in Milwaukee. So, so my question to you is this the new style of campus ministry, organizing them, dynamically structured, going out to reach them? See, your audience is not international students per se. I would say it's everybody, okay, across all cultures. Can you comment on whether this type of new model, new approach, is taking shape in the U.S. by any chance?
Yeah. Thank you for the question, by the way. Because I'm thinking about my the group I was with in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, but I'm like also comparing to different groups like Focus, SBO, I think even CCO up in Canada. Um, they it's I think we all in some sense like have this similar approach, but also I think different. Um, I think what comes to mind first and foremost is um, like yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, I think, why people are moved and why people are like drawn to um, mission, or especially like to the gospel, is just first and foremost like their relationship with the Lord. And when they know that, when they know they are loved, like deeply loved by the Father, that drives everything, that's what moves, and I mean, I can't say that, like, previous generations don't feel that, but I think in what I see in my, like, with my friends and my teammates, with the students that I've met, um, I think we've know and come to experience the Father's love very deeply. I think that's the best I can really explain that situation or this whole thing.
My name is Maggie. I just want to share, because I have two sons, and they were in the college before, right? And my oldest son, when he got into college, first thing, I didn't tell him what to do, but he joined the Newman's Club, and he served in that office, and he helped the priests. He even invited the bishops or the priests, to come and say mass once a month, and he prepared, for the liturgy, everything prepared for that. And in the campus, of course, other than Chinese, he also connected with other students, other schoolmates in there, and welcome them, and so I think when we're talking about Catholics, not only Chinese, if in campus, we should be more inclusive, okay, and everybody's are welcome, so that way they can make friends. And I remember on the third year he received a achievement award, from the Newman's Club. I said, oh, okay, and he invited the parents, to come to to the ceremony. I said, "Wow, okay, that's something surprised me, and I didn't know that he's been working, in the campus like that." So it's a very encouraging, action, and I just like to share with. Thank you.
Just wanted to reiterate, I think that what's really valuable here and this important shift, that the weight doesn't have to be on the chaplain, the campus minister, but you get young people themselves to be engaged in this process. This is, we Catholics have fallen back sometimes on the model of just letting the professionals, the priests and sisters, do everything. And we really need to empower young people to take their faith into their own hands.
This is just a comment. I'm very poor hard of hearing, so I'm not sure I heard everything you said. Just a few moments ago, I think you said it makes all the difference when people come to know in a very personal and deep way the love of God when they surrender to it. And that's kind of what you're talking about in campus ministry, introducing this kind of love to the people you meet. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. Like,
I just want to add this. I think what you're talking about is much needed with many, many Catholics of all ages, whether they're in college or not.
Yeah.
And in fact, my own experience is that I was a priest for many, many years before I even understood what it meant to know Jesus in a personal way. My training in the seminary was very intellectual, lots of dogma, lots of St. Thomas. It was great. And I understood Jesus as a thought, as a person, as a historical figure. But it was only when, because of many difficulties I've experienced in my life, more than half the classmates I was ordained with have left the priesthood, and that was a result of the Vatican Council changes and the whole decade from hell that I call the 60s, with the human rights movement, with the sexual revolution, the pill, all kinds of things that came up that made life as a priest rather challenging. I got involved with a Jesuit who taught me something about spiritual direction, and I've had a spiritual direction ever since, which has made all the difference. But it was only when I came to recognize and know Jesus in a personal way, not just in my head. In fact, I've heard it said the longest distance in the world is 15 inches from the head to your heart. And that means that Jesus is no longer a thought or a historical figure or someone you admire. He experienced his love in a personal way. And when that happened, I think I came to understand what Protestants mean by being born again. Because life's altogether different for me. I had a sense of being completed at a very deep level. Sort of like a hole in my soul had been plugged. And I think that's what I'm hearing from many younger priests who are coming out of the seminaries these days. There's much more emphasis on a personal relationship with Jesus than just studying theology. I'm hearing that from lots of other adult Catholics. I'm beginning to realize what it means to have a personal love for Jesus and not just to think about him or admire him or look forward to him to somehow getting you into heaven in the next world. Makes all the difference. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense, Father. And thank you so much for sharing that. And that you just, I think, you make a good point that, like, conversion is not, like, for, like, my age group or, like, young people, but it's for all. Like, when we're here on this earth, like, the Lord is calling for us to be converted again and again and again, you know? And I was told, I think, one time, too, about, like, 3 conversions of the head, the heart, and the will, right? And so, like, we can have, like, this intellectual conversion of, like, oh yeah, I know the teachings and dogma, and, like, the desire to serve, right? The will to serve the Lord. But, like, yeah, sometimes the heart kind of missing that sometimes. But once we have all 3, you know, then we get to, yeah, experience more of Jesus Christ, you know, so.
Hello, this is Alfred. I became Catholic in a Newman Center at the university. So as part of my experience in Catholic Newman Center as the only Chinese person, as well as one of very few international students in the Newman Center. So I didn't really feel well integrated in the community because of the language as well as the cultural barrier. So I want to understand the approach to help the Chinese as well as other international students to with Catholic faith, how to help them better integrate to the local Catholic community of the university. Thank you.
I think the best way I can think I don't know if you were at the other panels or like the previous panel, but like from their perspective, I thought they made like good points about like having Bible studies or different resources that can help international Chinese students to understand like what the church is teaching or like the different vocabulary words. Yeah, I think it's just like important to just make sure that people feel welcome, whatever background, wherever country you come from. I know even in my time as a missionary, we've had not Chinese students, but other international students that would come to our Newman Center because they knew about the dinners. But yeah, we still welcome them as they are, and and yeah, just like love them who they are, and I think that's still the main thing.
I just want to share one of my practices to involve Chinese students into some more Catholic activities or events. One thing is bring them to the celebrations. I do before COVID. I do 2 celebrations with Chinese students, Easter and Christmas. I brought them to the church talking about the concept of Easter, why we have a break in Easter, and why this is important. Kind of talk through that. They're interested. So from my observation, they're very interested. They want to know why we have a 3-day break in Easter, why this is very important. Although they celebrate Christmas many years, also in China, Christmas is a thing to celebrate. They also want to know why this is important. So bring them to those big celebrations, events during those important days. I even went to one of the Easter Vigil events with my students there. They express, they say, this is so beautiful. So coming from those beautiful, those type of events, try to involve them, then gradually they will probably go into other things that they are interested in. Even not, they will know, okay, I know why Easter is important. I know why Christmas is important. That's good education anyway.
Thank you. We'll wrap up quickly here, but I just want to throw in one. I think this point being made here about integrating people who might be attracted by the faith, but then how do they break in? I remember when I spoke with, or when I worked with students from China at Loyola University, sometimes their best friends were other international students. Okay, so one of my one student I still keep in touch with from EU, well, his best buddy was from Saudi Arabia. I mean, where were the American students? Where were they welcoming them in? But Professor Wong, who spoke in the earlier panel, said, if we're going to design a course, it's not just to get information across. It should be like one idea we had was a course that's an introduction to Christianity and Confucianism, where you'd have American students and Chinese students who could share about their respective traditions and learn about one another's tradition and get the opportunity to meet one another. The faith is not just a set of ideas, it's people, right? It's relationships. So anyway, I think that's a very important point. Thank you very much, Alfred. I appreciate your insight, and we'll be in touch.
Do you think it's more difficult for Chinese students coming from China to understand Christianity than if they were coming from a predominantly Hindu or Muslim country? And then the other question, that was in the context of learning theology within Catholic universities. The second question was, do you think Chinese international students have a more difficult time getting used to American schools than Taiwanese students and students from Singapore?
In the morning sessions, I kind of explained when I'm talking about Chinese students, I'm not really only talking about students from mainland China. I'm talking about students who speaks Chinese. Students who speaks Chinese is what I mean, Chinese students. That's including everyone. As you mentioned, students from Taiwan, from Singapore, or even Chinese American students. The question is Chinese student had a harder time to fit into American environment than other students? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think they are facing very similar questions. They are facing very similar challenges. I would say that's similar, very similar difficulties they are facing. However, I do feel like students from other education system, non-mainland Chinese education system, they're more they feel more comfortable to talk with either teacher or staff. So that's for sure. So that's something I do experience. The student from Taiwan will go to me easier other than other Chinese student, because from a Chinese education background, I would think go to teacher is a bad thing. So only bad students will go to teachers, right? So that's like deeply rooting to my mind. Even I have questions, I had a hard time to talking to my professor. Even now, as a PhD student, I feel like, should I go like only bad students go to teachers, right? Right. So Chinese students have this mind, so they would prefer to talk with their the classmates, between the classmates, peer support. Or they would feel more comfortable talk with me other than like Americans. So, but I feel like non-Chinese system students, like students from Taiwan, they had a better time. So they understand that talking to a teacher is nothing to be ashamed. So they would feel more comfortable to either meet with a teacher or talk with a teacher. So I hope this can somehow answer this question.